Have you ever noticed that some people can never let go of an enemy, even when the fight is over, even when they've won, even when that person is no longer part of their life? They still think about them. They still talk about them. They still carry them everywhere they go. At first, it looks like hatred, but sometimes it isn't hatred at all. Sometimes the enemy became part of who they are. And without realizing it, they no longer know who they would be without the fight. Thousands of years ago, there was a warrior who spent his life hunting monsters. Everyone believed he was protecting the world. But there was one thing nobody asked. What if the monsters were not the only thing keeping the world alive? What if they were also keeping him alive? This is the story of Thor. But it is also the story of anyone who has ever built their identity around a battle they could not let go. For most of us, that question sounds strange. Why would anyone need an enemy? After all, enemies are obstacles, problems, threats, things we want out of our lives. But human beings are complicated. Sometimes a person spends so many years fighting something that the fight becomes their purpose. And when the purpose disappears, they feel lost. That is what makes Thor such a fascinating character. Because when most people hear his name, they think of strength, a giant hammer, thunder, victory. But that is not what his story is really about. Thor's life revolved around one thing: giants. Everywhere he looked, there were giants. Every threat came from giants. Every great battle involved giants. Every reason for his existence pointed toward giants. He hated them. He hunted them. He spent his life fighting them. And that sounds heroic, until you ask a very uncomfortable question. What happens to a warrior whose entire identity depends on the existence of an enemy? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning. Thor was born into a world that was already divided. On one side stood the gods of Asgard. On the other stood the giants. And long before Thor lifted his hammer for the first time, both sides had already decided who the enemy was. That is how many conflicts begin. Not with personal experience, not with understanding, but with a story. A story about who should be feared, who should be blamed, who should be fought. Thor grew up hearing those stories. The giants were dangerous. The giants were chaotic. The giants threatened everything the gods had built. And so, from a young age, Thor learned something that would define his entire life. A hero protects. A hero fights. A hero never backs down. And there was no shortage of enemies. Every time a giant crossed a boundary, Thor was there. Every time Asgard felt threatened, Thor was sent. Every victory made him more famous. Every battle made him more important. Every defeated giant proved that he was exactly who everyone believed him to be. The protector, the defender, the strongest warrior in the 9 realms. And for a while, that seemed like a perfect life. But there was something strange, hidden beneath all those victories. Because every time Thor destroyed one enemy, another one appeared. Every time peace seemed possible, a new threat emerged. A new giant, a new conflict, a new reason to pick up the hammer. At first, nobody questioned it. Why would they? The world needed a hero, and Thor needed a purpose. But sometimes, those two needs are more connected than they appear. And the older Thor became, the more his entire identity wrapped itself around a single idea. Without giants, who was he? That question would follow him for the rest of his life, even though he never asked it out loud. As the years passed, Thor became exactly what everyone expected him to be. When danger appeared, people called for Thor. When giants threatened the borders, people called for Thor. When fear spread through Asgard, people called for Thor, and every time he answered. Every single time. The strange thing about reputation is that it starts as something other people give you, but eventually, it becomes something you are afraid to lose. Thor was no longer just a warrior. He had become a symbol. The symbol of strength, the symbol of protection, the symbol of certainty in an uncertain world. And symbols have a problem. They are not allowed to change. The stronger Thor became, the less freedom he had, because everyone already knew who he was supposed to be. Then came one of the most famous journeys in his life, a journey into the land of the giants, a place called Jotunheim. Thor entered that land with complete confidence. Why wouldn't he? For years he had defeated every enemy placed before him. For years he had been told he was unstoppable. For years every battle had reinforced the same belief. You are Thor. You are the strongest. You are the hero. But what happened in Jotunheim would expose something he had never considered. The possibility that strength alone was not enough. The possibility that the story he believed about himself was incomplete. And most importantly, the possibility that he did not understand his enemies nearly as well as he thought. What happened next would become one of the greatest humiliations of his life. But it would also reveal something far more important, something that most people miss when they hear this story. Because this was never just a battle between Thor and the giants. It was a confrontation between a man and the identity he had built around his enemies. The ruler of that strange land welcomed Thor with a smile. Not with an army, not with a battlefield, not with a weapon, just a smile. And that alone should have been a warning, because truly dangerous people do not always fight the way you expect. The giant king listened patiently as Thor spoke of his strength. Then he offered a challenge. Not a war, not a duel, just a few simple contests. At first, Thor almost seemed insulted. Why would the greatest warrior in the 9 realms waste his time proving himself? But he accepted, because that is what happens when your identity depends on being the strongest. Sooner or later, you feel compelled to prove it. Again, and again, and again. The first challenge seemed easy. Thor was handed a drinking horn. The task was simple. Drink it empty. Thor laughed. He raised the horn and drank, and drank, and drank. But the liquid barely moved. He tried again. Nothing. A third time. Still not enough. For the first time in a very long time, Thor failed. The hall filled with laughter. Then came another challenge. A cat, lifted from the floor. That was all. A simple cat. Thor grabbed it, pulled with all his strength. The muscles in his arms tightened. The floor shook beneath him. Yet somehow, he could barely lift one of its paws. Again, laughter filled the hall. Then came the final humiliation. An old woman, frail, bent with age. Thor was told to wrestle her. Surely this would be easy. Surely now he could restore his pride. But within moments, the old woman forced him to one knee. The strongest warrior in the world, defeated by an old woman. The giants laughed. Thor burned with anger, confusion, humiliation. Nothing made sense. How could this happen? How could every challenge end in failure? How could the strongest warrior alive look so weak? But the answer would not come until later. And when it did, it would change the meaning of everything that had happened. Later, after the contests were over, the giant king finally revealed the truth. And suddenly, everything made sense. The drinking horn had not been an ordinary horn. One end of it was connected to the sea itself. Thor had not failed to empty a cup. He had managed to lower the level of an ocean. The cat had not been a cat. It had been Jormungandr, the world's serpent, the creature so enormous that it wrapped itself around the entire world. And Thor had lifted it, not completely, but enough to make the impossible move. And the old woman, she was not an old woman at all. She was old age itself, time, the one opponent that defeats kings, warriors, heroes, and gods alike. And yet Thor had resisted longer than anyone else could. The giants had not laughed because he was weak. They had laughed because they knew what he was truly fighting, something far beyond strength. When Thor heard the truth, something unexpected happened. His humiliation disappeared. But another problem remained, a much deeper one, because for years, Thor had believed every challenge in life could be solved the same way. Find the enemy, fight the enemy, defeat the enemy. But what happens when the thing standing in front of you is not really the problem? What happens when the battle itself is the illusion? Because the giants had just shown Thor something he had never understood. Not every struggle exists to be conquered. Not every enemy exists to be destroyed. And not every fight makes you stronger. Some fights simply keep you busy. Busy enough that you never ask the questions underneath them. And that realization points us toward the most important truth in Thor's story. A truth that has almost nothing to do with giants. Most people hear Thor's story and focus on the giants. But the giants are not the most interesting part of the story. Thor is, and more specifically, the role the giants played in his life. Because if you look closely, something strange begins to appear. Every victory gave Thor meaning. Every battle gave him direction. Every enemy reminded him who he was. The protector, the warrior, the hero. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if Thor didn't just fight giants because they threatened his world? What if he also needed them because they gave shape to his identity? After all, who is a protector with nothing left to protect? Who is a warrior with no battles left to fight? Who is a hero without a monster? Most of us would like to believe we are different. But are we? Some people spend years fighting a rival. Some spend years fighting a former partner. Some spend years fighting a difficult boss. Some spend years fighting an injustice. And over time, something unexpected happens. The struggle stops being something they experience. It becomes something they are. The enemy becomes part of the identity. The battle becomes part of the personality. The conflict becomes part of the self. And then one day, the enemy disappears. The relationship ends. The rival leaves. The problem is solved. The battle is over. And instead of feeling free, they feel empty. Not because they lost, but because they no longer know who they are without the fight. That is the hidden tragedy in Thor's story. Not that he spent his life fighting giants, but that fighting giants became one of the ways he understood himself. And sometimes, the hardest thing a human being can do is not defeat an enemy. It is discovering who they are after the enemy is gone. Maybe that is why Thor's story still survives after so many centuries. Not because he was strong, not because he carried a legendary hammer, but because his story forces us to ask a question most people spend their lives avoiding. What part of me exists because of the battles I fight? And what part of me would remain if those battles disappeared tomorrow? Because sometimes the thing we call an enemy is also the thing that gives structure to our lives. And sometimes freedom is not defeating the monster. Sometimes freedom begins when we finally learn who we are without it. So before you leave, ask yourself one question. If the battle you've been fighting for years suddenly ended tomorrow, would you know who you are?